I really hope there's nyack bird hunting in this adaptation. Seriously, Apple. Either we get nyack bird hunting on speeders with needle guns, or we riot. Hi, and welcome back to YouTube.com. I'm your host and fan of books, Andrew, and on today's episode of The Writer's Block, we'll be reviewing Isaac Asimov's classic Foundation. I was thrilled when I saw that Apple, the computer/iPhone company, is adapting Foundation for their new streaming service. This may come as a bit of a surprise to you, but I am somewhat of a science fiction fan. I love sci-fi movies and TV shows. Science fiction really has become the mainstream. If you look at the top grossing movies of all time, many of them are science fiction films. And based on the fact that you're here watching this video, I'd wager a bet that you're somewhat of a sci-fi fan yourself. But I'm ashamed to say that it wasn't until recently that I read Isaac Asimov's Foundation. It's a series that is well known, highly influential, words are hard. It's a series that is well known, highly influential, and still constantly talked about today. And it's been on my reading list for years now. So when I saw the first footage for Apple's Foundation series, I started to get really excited. The production quality and special effects looked absolutely fantastic. And I thought to myself, I might actually subscribe to Apple TV and get a free trial and immediately cancel it after I finish this show. I also thought to myself, I really need to read Foundation before the show comes out so I can have a clear picture of the novel untainted by the upcoming show. And after reading the book, honestly, I have to say I have no idea how they're going to adapt this thing. Asimov was an extremely prolific and influential writer. Many of his works, including Foundation and the Robot series, have cemented their status as classics. Over the course of his career, he wrote and edited more than 500 books. That's just insane. That's crazy. Brandon Sanderson and Stephen King can't even touch this guy. And they're pumping out books faster than most people can read. Asimov was frankly a genius. He coined the term robotics, and maybe that's because he himself was a robot. Seriously, how do you write 500 books? How? But he didn't just write science fiction. No. He also wrote nonfiction, literary criticism, essays on chemistry, mathematics, astronomy, even biblical commentary, and college-level biochemistry textbooks. So yes, we can in fact conclude that he was a robot. Once a piece of literature attains classic status, it becomes difficult to untangle it from its own legacy, to pluck it out of history and review it on its own merits. After all, in 1966, Foundation won a Hugo Award for Best All-Time Series, beating out The Lord of the Rings. Asimov began writing Foundation as a collection of short stories between 1942 and 1950. The shadow of the Second World War and the death and destruction that overwhelmed the world is very much present in this book. At its core, this is the story of the unraveling of human societies and systems, only on a galactic scale. The story builds on two central ideas: the demise of a galactic empire and the psychohistory which predicted that demise. Foundation is often credited as being the first prominent work of science fiction to feature a galactic empire. The Foundation stories were wrapped up, packaged together, and published as a trilogy in 1951, so 14 years before Dune was published, 15 years before Star Trek aired on TVs, and 25 years before the original Star Wars hit cinemas. All of those stories also feature galactic empires and were obviously heavily influenced by Foundation. It's hard to imagine science fiction today without massive interplanetary governments, but it all starts with Foundation, really. Psychohistory is also one of my favorite elements I've encountered in a sci-fi series. It's essentially the ability to predict the general path of the future of humanity, but it's not presented as some sort of psychic power. It's presented as a new field of science. It's sort of a blend between psychology, sociology, and mathematics, and a new kind of space-age religion sprouts out of the soils of psychohistory. I think Foundation's ideas and the scope and its literary legacy all absolutely deserve 5 stars. But if I had to rate the characters in this book, I could only give them 3 stars at best. This book is not remembered for its character work. They're not necessarily bad or weak characters, but they're not great either. The characters and their individual journeys and lives are not the stars of this story. The Foundation and the collapse of the Empire are the stars of the story. It's a very broad story, spanning generations and ages, and we only glimpse little moments of its history. If you're going into this for the first time, don't expect conventional storytelling. This series was written as a collection of short stories, and it shows. The novel opens with Harry Seldon and his new apprentice Gal Dornick. They're in the midst of a heated political battle as Seldon has begun to publish his controversial findings, based on psychohistory, that the galactic empire will inevitably collapse, and the worlds within it will fall into chaos, ruin, and isolation as a new dark age emerges. So Seldon and his group of scientists are essentially exiled to a resource-poor planet on the outskirts of the galaxy, where they are tasked with completing and compiling a detailed history of the galactic empire in an attempt to preserve the knowledge it contained against a potential collapse. Boom. And then before you know it, you're launched generations into the future, and all the characters you were introduced to in the opening chapters of the book are dead, and suddenly there's a new cast of characters at play. These new characters have their own crises and set of problems that they face. Those problems come to a head within a few chapters, and then boom, you're launched forward another generation into the future, and there's yet another new cast of characters, a new set of problems. I wasn't prepared for this going in. I was expecting a lot more of a traditional type of story and structure, and I found it really jarring. I think it had a negative impact on my initial response to the book just because I'm not used to this type of format. I really enjoy getting to know characters, spending a lot of time with them, seeing them slowly overcome their struggles, seeing the whole arc as they experience a transformation. I'm kind of a more basic boy, okay? But eventually I kind of eased into Asimov's mode of storytelling for this series, started to enjoy it, kind of knew what to expect, and each successive time jump was a lot less jarring. There's a lot of sitting around and talking in these books. Most of the action tends to take place off screen, so to speak. Sometimes it feels like the characters kind of exist just to spout exposition and catch the reader up after each time jump. Science fiction really was a completely different animal at the time Asimov was writing. It seems like the market was saturated with a lot more camp and stories of damsels in distress, but Asimov and a handful of his contemporaries were really able to usher in this new era of modern sci-fi. And for that reason, Foundation still feels really relevant and fresh today, even if the character work is kind of forgettable. Dune, Star Wars, Star Trek, all of these stories would not be what they are without Foundation. In a lot of ways, Dune feels like a direct response to Foundation, as if you're zeroing in on one family, one planet dealing with the collapse of the Empire. Conversely, Star Trek feels like a counterpoint to Foundation. Whereas Foundation is about the imploding and slow collapse of a galactic empire, Star Trek is about the spirit of discovery and exploration, branching out. And yes, Star Trek, Star Wars, Dune, they all have far more memorable characters than Foundation. If I'm being completely honest, some of Foundation was a little bit of a chore to get through. I still really enjoyed the book overall. It's something that every science fiction fan should read because it really is the foundation to the genre. So even though this might be considered heresy by many hardcore sci-fi fans, I have to go with my own emotional response to reading the novel and give it an overall score of 4 stars out of 5. Still a really good score. It seems like every company on earth has a streaming service right now. You hear of a new one every day, just about. I was not planning on getting a subscription to Apple's service because none of the shows really have been that interesting to me, but I'm actually really excited for this series and I'm really curious on how they're going to adapt this. I'm planning on reviewing the show. I want to see how different it is from the book. It doesn't seem like it can be a straightforward adaptation, and maybe it really will be that the first episode or the first 3 episodes focuses on one time period, one cast of characters, and then that story wraps up and it's more of an anthology story, and then we jump forward in time for the next few episodes and we have a new cast of characters. That very well could be, but my guess is going to be that they're going to modify the story, compressing the timeline for the collapse of the Empire and the jumps through time, and we're going to stick more with one central cast and kind of follow their journey through the collapse of the Empire. I just feel like that will be a lot more successful with modern audiences, especially those who are just kind of casual viewers who haven't read the book and are just coming at this with fresh eyes. Those type of modifications to the structure seems like it would be received much better with viewers today. I guess we'll just have to wait and see how it turns out. I really hope there's nyack bird hunting in this adaptation. Seriously, Apple. Either we get nyack bird hunting on speeders with needle guns, or we riot. This is a fantastic year for science fiction and fantasy fans. This month, September, we've got an adaptation of Foundation coming up, and then next month, October, we've got Dune, and then we've got The Wheel of Time airing in November. What did you think? Have you read Foundation? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Are you going to watch the show? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe and tune in next time. See you soon.